Part 3. The much-awaited Imperial capital. As he peered through the slight gap he had opened in the coach's window, Ains felt a terrible sense of defeat. Life and energy abounded here. The faces of the people were bright. It was a bustling city, completely unlike the dreary Sorceress Kingdom. And then, the sense of defeat soon faded away. After all, his city had been annexed recently. When a city was taken over by a new ruler, life would change. It was only natural that people would feel uneasy, leading to a temporary state of low energy. Punitomo had once taught Ains about strategy games. When one conquered territory during a war, the happiness value of the people would plummet. Also, what did he say about partisans appearing? The heck? Why would a large amount of weapons appear all of a sudden? The first part was completely unrelated to the second. He had the feeling that he had gotten something wrong somewhere. Since the game had nothing to do with YGGDRASIL, he had lost interest halfway. However, they should have been vaguely related, at least. He was probably talking about some kind of betrayal. Or maybe it was some form of player slang, huh? Partisans seems to be a kind of polearm. So, when he talked about weapons being sold in large quantities, he was talking about a reason to fight. Citizen levies, maybe? Maybe they're fighting the new ruler, but that would be an uprising, right? Then it should have just been called a rebellion from the beginning. Why partisans? Well, it doesn't matter anyway. The reason why there had been no rebellion in Irantal was because the Death Knights were patrolling to maintain public order. Or was it because the character of Morn had a calming effect on them? No, perhaps the root reason was because of his benevolent social policies. Nothing's better than a peaceful reign. Killing the goose for the golden eggs is utter foolishness. I guess I need to make the occasional concession like returning dropped items to an opponent after Peking them, perhaps. As he recalled the contents of Peking for Dummies, Ains realized that he had gotten distracted, and hurriedly got his thoughts back on track. Hang on, I was thinking about high energy. Well, no matter what, I only rule one city, and this is the capital of the empire, which has many cities, so the difference in their energy levels can't be helped. Even their populations are different. So I guess as long as the number of people increases, the Sorceress Kingdom will also become more vibrant. I guess I need to focus on policies which encourage a population increase. Albedo can carry them out. After Ains comforted himself, he decided upon a new direction to take, in his capacity as a ruler. Then, Your Majesty. The man who was looking out the window as well spoke to him, and it brought Ains back from his thoughts. I fear to ask, Your Majesty, but is this not the imperial capital, Arwintar? The man, who had practically been kidnapped, asked that question in a trembling voice. Indeed it is. As expected of the Adventurers Guildmaster, you recognize this place at a glance. Thank you very. No, wait. I don't recall us passing through any checkpoints. Isn't this illegal immigration? That was, in fact, what had happened. Since they had used the gate spell to directly transit to the imperial capital, they would not have passed through any checkpoints. Details. These aren't just details. A king crossing the border illegally into another country is an international incident. Jiknev did the same thing when he came to Nazarick. Ains did not say that, of course. Common sense would dictate that the Guildmaster was right and Ains was wrong. After thinking as hard as he could, he still could not think of an explanation which Ains could accept. Instead, he ended up sighing at the man's surprising stubbornness. He had thought he would be the kind of man to say, well, as long as you don't get caught. His opinion of the man changed a little. Guildmaster, I have a very good relationship with Elnix Dono. I've even acted to his requests in the past. Ains recalled what had happened during that war. Well, I know it's hardly the same thing, but I'm sure he would gladly approve if I just asked him. Granted, it would be after the fact. But wouldn't it be alright if the Emperor himself permitted it? If you put it that way. The most important thing is that neither you nor I have brought anything bad with us. Doesn't that mean it's fine? Ainzik mused. Ains smiled in his heart, believing that he had convinced the other man. In truth, there were two reasons for their clandestine crossing of the border. If Jeknev knew about this, he would probably prepare a reception for me. He might be wary of Nazarick, but since I'm the king of an allied country, he would have to welcome me at the front door. That would be very bad. The Emperor would surely host some kind of ceremony to welcome the king of an ally's country. That was something which Ains, who was unfamiliar with the customs of noble society, had to avoid at all costs. If he became a laughingstock because of that, he would not be able to look the Guardians, who were working hard for the Sorceress Kingdom, in the eye. There was also another reason. Now, I need to think about how to get Ainzik involved in this. Perhaps I should ask for his help like I did when I spun that story at the guild. The other reason was because he wanted to pressure Guildmaster Ainzik into his schemes. Ains's objective in coming here was to recruit adventurers. He had already incorporated the Adventurers Guild as a national organization. However, even if the shell was ready, filling it up would take a long time. This was quite bad for the Sorceress Kingdom, since it only controlled one city and the number of adventurers they could draw on was completely insufficient. Using adventurers of other races, like lizard men, for example, was a matter for later. Right now, he had to increase the number of human adventurers. This was why he had to come here to do talent scouting. If it was not enough, he could recruit from the surrounding countries as well. However, this sort of recruitment was not easy, especially since Ains was essentially going to do door-to-door sales, one of the hardest kinds of work in the sales business. According to Ainzik, adventurers were supposedly freelancers, but in truth, they were a form of national defense against monsters. Headhunting them aggressively would lead to stiff backlash. Of course, Ains did not think he would lose, even if the adventurers' guilds of every single nation mounted a full-scale campaign against him. However, that would reduce the morale of any adventurers he did manage to recruit. It was quite easy to see how they would lose their motivation when seeing a conflict between their new allegiance and their former home. This was why he had to involve Ainzik, who understood Ains's aims and concepts, in all of this. Surely things would go smoothly if he was the middleman. He had considered that Ainzik would flat out refuse if he told him about this in Erantal, so he had dragged him along like this. In addition, he was also considering the fact that Ainzik would have something in common with the other side. That was a secret of salesmanship. People tended to gravitate towards those who were similar to them. Ains, no, Suzuki Satoru had seen colleagues leverage the fact that they had been born in the same place or that they supported the same team as prospective clients to clinch a sale. Having once been born the adventurer, Ains understood the life of the adventurer, to some extent. However, he had risen through the ranks so quickly that he could not say that he truly knew the hardships of being an adventurer. Thus, he had to let Ainzik, who was a veteran adventurer and also the Adventurers Guildmaster, speak for him to improve the other side's closeness to him. In other words, the success of their little expedition to the Empire was reliant on Ainzik's performance. Still, the question is, how can I truly motivate Ainzik to help? If it was a matter of money, he could certainly pay. However, he did not imagine that such means would make Ainzik give his all. Let's go. After commanding the driver, the coach began moving quietly. The driver in question was a creature which Ains had summoned with what little gold he had left, a monster whose level was over 80, called Hanzo. Hanzo was a humanoid ninja-type monster, and was skilled in countering stealth. There were others of roughly the same level, such as Cash and Koji, which was skilled in illusion. Fuma, which was skilled in hand-to-hand combat and special techniques, Tobi Kato, which was skilled with weapons, and Saran. The interior of the coach clattered noisily as it traveled forward. Ains had considered that using a heavily enchanted coach would be very suspicious. Thus, he had chosen a regular stage coach instead. Then, Your Majesty, since we have already arrived at the imperial capital, can you tell me what we will be doing here? Ainzik furrowed his brows. We will be recruiting adventurers for our country. A bitter expression crossed Ainzik's face. It was clear he was having trouble accepting that. Could it be that you intend to persuade the adventurers of the Empire to join you? Indeed, we will be headhunting in this country. While it had been done during a time of war, the fact that he had killed so many soldiers of the kingdom would make it very difficult to attract the adventurers from the kingdom to his camp. In addition, Albedo was visiting the kingdom, so he could not make things difficult for her. That being the case, their allied country, the Empire, was the ideal option. The city-state alliance was some distance away from here, according to Fluda's intelligence on the countries. However, after consulting Demiurge and Albedo, he decided that intervening there was not wise. In what way will you proceed? Ainzik took a deep breath. Your Majesty, I have engraved your views on adventurers deep into my heart. Thus, I wish to aid your Majesty with all my strength. That said, I am still a man of the system, for the most part. I feel that having adventurers abandon everything they have known up till now would be very difficult. This is particularly true for the adventurers of the Empire. A sensation of new, fresh joy welled up within Ains's chest. Indeed, Ains wanted opinions like this. It was not that the Guardians were at fault, but they took everything he said as a divine pronouncement and rushed to execute them. Thus, Ains was frequently uneasy about whether or not he had given the right orders. Because of that, he had longed to hear someone oppose one of his statements. That way, he would know where the problems lay. Ains's opinion of Ainzik went up by a notch. Still, he could not completely accept his views. Heaven only knew why, but all his subordinates seemed to think that the Sorcerer King Ains Ulgan was a genius. Thus, Ains could not say or do anything to betray that faith. He could not disappoint them. How baffling. The benefits ought to outweigh the drawbacks. I do not understand. It seems I do not know enough about adventurers. His face, which showed no emotion, was a great help, because nobody could tell he was lying. It was the ultimate poker face. At this point, Ains stopped for a moment and looked Ainzik straight in the eyes. He could not imply that he was waiting for the man's response. What would you do, if it was up to you? Is there a proposal which would be attractive enough to make adventurers who have already picked out a home base change their minds? Your Majesty, must we start headhunting right now? What? Are we going to start trying to entice the adventurers of the imperial capital right away? Ains cupped his chin with a hand as he thought. If possible, he would like to do so as soon as possible. However, if he could not, he did not mind waiting. After all, the aim was to sing the praises of the Sorceress Kingdom. Heteromorphs did not possess the concept of a lifespan. In that sense, there was more than enough time. Indeed, it is not particularly urgent. Then, should we not lay a strong foundation first? We should build the desired organization within the Sorceress Kingdom, and then make various other preparations as need. Once the shell is ready, we can fill it at leisure. Is that wrong? That is an excellent suggestion, one which I have considered before. However, it poses a problem of its own. If we do not estimate the contents before we begin to build, the finished vessel may be too large or too small. Would you care to try? Indeed, that task is beyond me. After all, I remain unsure of how your Majesty wishes to nurture adventurers, and I do not understand the extent of your plans for the Sorceress Kingdom. Indeed, frankly speaking, I am still feeling things out. In particular, I know you are interested in my words, but I do not know how many hearts they can move. In order to observe their reactions, I have come to the Empire to attempt to test recruitment, and to see the outcome. I see. As expected of your Majesty, you have already planned so far. AEAD. I am ashamed of my shallow thinking. Certainly not. You and I are different beings. Because of that, I might make a mistake when it comes to the reactions of human beings. For all I know, I might say something which upsets others. Please tell me if such a situation occurs. In that respect, I will need a helper. Ainzik. Yes. Then, I'll be counting on you in the future. Ainzik paused to think for about a second, and then he bowed his head deeply. It looked just like how the Guardians of Nazarick did it. Ains graciously nodded as he reflected on his previous words. In any case, can I really leave the task of appealing to the Empire's adventurers to Ainzik alone? This was a very important point. He could do the presentation himself if need be, but it was not because he particularly liked it. If someone was more adept at a task and more capable, then he should hand it to them. However, I can't leave it all to him. If a problem comes up, I ought to deal with it as his superior. He did not want to be a bad boss. Ains clung to that determination. Just then, he realized that Ainzik seemed to have fallen into contemplation. Is something wrong, Your Majesty? Could it be that you do not intend to limit yourself to the current crop of adventurers, but to incorporate the adventurers of the future into your organization and have them explore the unknown world? That was my intention. With that in mind, I feel trying to persuade the present batch of adventurers will be very difficult. However, it might be possible to have those people who wish to become adventurers come to our Sorceress Kingdom. That is to say, we will gather the hatchlings and then raise them. While adventurers knew no borders, the people who became adventurers belonged to a certain country. Ains hadn't thought of this point as well, but since this man, who was more familiar with this world than Ains, shared his opinion, then it should be fine. I see. Then, what should we do? The strong have always been admired. Thus, may I ask how your Majesty feels about showing his might as a form of advertisement? And what would that accomplish? Ains thought. That said, publicity was very important. After all, the reason why he was founding his own adventurers guild was to spread the name of the Sorceress Kingdom of Ainz-Ooal-Gown. So I have to show my might and do what adventurers do. All I have to do is make an empire brand mourn, then, Ains thought. However, Ainzik shook his head. On that note, Your Majesty, this is the imperial capital. How would you feel about displaying your might in the arena? Ho, that sounds interesting. Elaborate. The coach stopped in a spacious courtyard. Morn and Nabe had walked the streets of the imperial capital, but Ains had never seen such a huge personal home during that time. Not even in Erantil had he seen a mansion more impressive than this. Is this the home of the arena's owner? This is quite an impressive place. Ainzik's response to Ains's question was along the lines of, that might be stretching it. The arena itself is state property. People rent it for events, so calling them promoters might be more accurate. The person who lives here is among the most powerful of those people. I see. A friend of yours. It would be good if that was the case. Regretfully, Ainzik shook his head. There are many events in the arena, and sometimes adventurers end up fighting monsters. I've only met this person a few times, when I captured those monsters and shipped them here. Is that so? Still, it ended up being quite useful indeed, so I must thank you for your connection. That said, what sort of monsters did you capture around the outskirts of Erantal? Ainsec had an uncomfortable look on his face. We captured the undead from the Katsa Plains. The undead didn't need food, so they didn't incur additional expenses after we captured them. Ho! Good eye. You do know your stuff, after all. Is that so? I don't strike myself as a very likable person. Still, Your Majesty, I fear to offend you, but is it really alright to speak of capturing your kind? Ains looked straight at Ainsec. What on earth was he on about? Because they're undead. Ah, I see. Well, there are many kinds of undead. I do not count all undead as my kin. Forgive my disrespect. Then, may inquire as to what type of undead Your Majesty might be. If it does not offend, of course. I am an overlord. Have you heard of them before? My deepest apologies, but I have not. I was not inclined toward my studies, so I do not know. Well, that's to be expected, Ains thought. In YGGDRASIL, there were several types of monsters in the Overlord family. The Overlord Wiseman, which was skilled in magic, the Overlord Chronos Master, which could use time-related special abilities, the Overlord General, which was adept at controlling armies of the undead, among others. Even the weakest of those was at least level 80. He had a rough grasp of the strength of this world and the amount of strength one need to be considered powerful in this world. That being the case, the appearance of an undead being like an overlord would cause a huge disturbance. Particularly because the undead did not age, so they would continue ruling the land for all eternity until it was defeated. In other words, the fact that nothing like this had happened implied that there were no overlords here. Is that so? Well, intend to send adventurers into the unknown reaches of the world to collect information of that sort. It would be quite troublesome if others of my kind were around bearing a hatred for the living. Do you understand? Ainsic's eyes went wide, and he nodded. It is as you say. I now thoroughly understand the true nature of adventurers. Indeed. Consider me an undead being that is an exception to the rules. I understand the value of humanity, so I will not engage in meaningless slaughter. However, other overlords might not think the same way, no? Is that really the case? That remains to be seen. I do not know if I am the exception, or if my species is an exception in itself. However, should we not assume the worst-case scenario and prepare accordingly? It is as Your Majesty says. I shall engrave it into my heart. Ainsec nodded. If there were traces of one having appeared, and having been defeated, it might have had some involvement with whoever brainwashed Shaltir. No, one could not rule out an overlord being dominated the same way Shaltir had been. Then, I shall go secure an appointment for the meeting. Thank you. Ainsec got off the coach. After Ains watched him leave, he took out his mask and put it on. He could go around barefaced in Erantal, but this was the imperial capital, and he had crossed borders illegally to be here, so at the very least it was better to hide his true face. His robe was also something that was more subdued. Although it meant that his personal equipment would go down by one class, it could not be helped. After all, Ains only had one set of divine class robes. While he still had the things left behind by his friends, in the end, the armor his friends left behind was more customized than their weapons. Therefore, it was not so much that he could not equip them, but that he could not bring out their full power, being that he could not make use of the large amounts of data that were used to benefit their abilities. That being the case, it was still better for Ains to use the items which had been made for him, even if they were a little weaker. After swapping out his gear, a knocking came from the door of the carriage, followed by Ainsley's voice. It would seem less than 5 minutes had passed. My deepest apologies, Your Majesty. What happened? I regret to say that today does not seem convenient. The other party hopes we can come again tomorrow. However, I believe we can force our way in to convey Your Majesty's words to his ears. What shall we do? There is no need for that. Forcing an unsolicited meeting during a busy period would not endear anyone to him. On the contrary, when one looked at it from a business point of view, the very fact that they had come uninvited and not been chased away, but given a time to visit again could be considered a major accomplishment. Then, we'll come again tomorrow. Good thing there's been a lot of free time lately. What's wrong? Ains realized Ainsley was goggling at him, and so he asked him why. No, it's nothing. I just felt that Your Majesty is a truly generous person. After all, there are those nobles who look down on merchants. And you believed I would insist on a meeting. The fact that Ains did not answer immediately told him. I did believe that, in a way that words could not convey. Would that be the right thing to do from a ruler's point of view? Ains wondered. While it seemed a bit too late to think of that now, Ains Ulgan was a king. If that was what a ruler ought to do, then he need to do it, even if it seemed strange to Suzuki Satoru. This is my first time occupying a position over humans. Should I not do so, if it was appropriate? An uncomfortable look appeared on Ainsley's face again. I am unsure, Your Majesty. I have never met the king, so I cannot say if it is true or not. Although, personally speaking, I prefer Your Majesty's point of view. That said, high-ranking nobles might consider such forcefulness to be appropriate. Human society is so complicated. For some reason, Ainsley smiled warmly to Ains after he muttered that. It might well be as Your Majesty says. There are many complicated things indeed. Their chuckling filled the coach. Ains clenched his right fist where nobody could see. It would seem Ainsley was no longer so guarded. He was sure of it. Then, did you tell him and that I would be coming tomorrow as well? No, I did not do that. I wanted to hear what you thought of it first, Your Majesty. Or am I permitted to use Your Majesty's name? It's fine as long as they are not humans who will make a fuss. Since they are friends of yours, I will leave it to your own discretion. Understood. Then I shall not disclose it for now. After discussing details like the time and so on, Ainsley stepped down from the coach again. Ains felt a bit guilty about using him as a runner. While he knew this was not a world where seniority mattered, Suzuki Satoru was a working man, and it bothered him to order an older person around. Now I understand why people dislike having old subordinates. He would not have had a problem ordering someone around from a completely different company. For instance, if Ainsley was from the Empire, he could point and dictate with no problems at all. The reason why Ains could not do so was because he had come to see Ainsley as one of his subordinates. I need to reward him appropriately. The people of Nazarick don't ask for payment, but they're an exception. If I forget this, they'll think of me as a terrible ruler. I must not become the boss of a black-hearted enterprise. Ains vowed that to the voice of hero in his mind. Although, when it comes to rewarding Ainsley, how much should I pay him, as a king? The same as a mithril-ranked adventurer? No, there should be a duty allowance as well. So another 5% on top of that? Is there anyone I can ask about how much is appropriate? He could discuss it with Demiurge or Albedo, but it was unclear whether the two of them had any idea of what kind of payment was appropriate. He had the feeling they would reply with something along the lines of, "He should be glad to serve you, Ains-sama." As expected, I need to find a wise human. Fluda said he was very confident in his magical knowledge, but knew next to nothing about other matters. Nazarick was arguably invincible, but he felt uneasy about his lack of knowledge concerning human society. So I'll start by using him until someone better comes along, then. I guess agreeing with Demiurge's proposal was the right choice. Then again, I had no intention of denying him when he brought it up. TL note: this part is fairly complex. Ains uses a saying here which refers to taking the first step with something subpar. However, Ains has misstated one word, going from Eurimeo to Eurimeo. As Ains drifted off into contemplation once more, someone knocked on the door. Forgive the delay, Your Majesty. It's not as though I was waiting for you. However, Ains decided to allow Ainsic to continue, with a magnanimous attitude that best fitted a ruler. As you have desired, the appointment has been made to meet at 10 in the morning tomorrow, Your Majesty. Umu. Then, there's just the matter of waiting until tomorrow. Next, I shall use teleportation magic to send you to Erantal. Relax and accept the spell. Greater teleportation. Ainsic's body disappeared in an instant. The greater teleportation would safely transport him to the outermost of Erantal's triple gates. Even if there was someone at the destination, the spell would deposit him at the nearest safe location, so there was no need to verify the destination with magic. Then, I should contact that guy with message. Ains muttered to himself. This was a distasteful task, so he did that to pull himself together. He was sending the message to Fluda, who had offered everything to him. The reason why he had been dragging his feet on giving the man what he had promised was because he did not feel confident he could actually give that old man what he wanted. Fluda wanted Ains to teach him everything he knew about magic. Yet, Ains's power did not come from the study of magic. Perhaps if this was YGGDRASIL, he might be qualified to talk about magic. Sadly, the magic system of this world worked slightly different from that of YGGDRASIL. Why was it that they learned the same spells in different ways? He had asked himself that question many times, but he could not find an answer. In addition, there was a veritable mountain of other unanswered questions. In the worst-case scenario, he had to consider that he might not be able to use his powers from YGGDRASIL. Perhaps he could find the answer by using the level Dre option of the super-tier spell, Wish Upon a Star. In this world, that spell could alter reality itself, and by Dre multiple levels, it could fulfill a greater wish. However, that was a very risky gamble. It was unknown if he would find the answer even if he used it. It was very likely he would just be wasting effort. More importantly, he was afraid to use a spell which qualified as a trump card. Of course, it would be a different matter if he had a way to obtain large amounts of experience, but sadly, he had not discovered such a way so far. Although he had no lungs, Ains went, "Ha," as he sighed. He had the attitude of a salesman who was prepared to apologize for failing to deliver the requested goods to a client as he cast the message spell. Fludo Paradigm. It is I, Ains Urgaon. Once he reached him, he continued speaking the pre-arranged words. You were born in Belmas village. Your earliest contact with magic was through the spellcaster in your village. Oh, it is you, teacher. Long have I awaited this. He could feel the gratitude from Fluda. Those pre-arranged words were a form of code, because Fluda had said that there was no way to tell if the person on the other side of a message was a friend or a stranger. Thus, they had arranged to verify their identity by mentioning the already changed name of his village and his memory. Still, even after doing that, Fluda's doubts about the message spell remained. He's got it pretty bad. That said, there was not much Ains could do about it. Ains made his reply, feeling slightly intimidated by the burning intensity of Fluda's enthusiasm. Forgive the slight delay. I believe it is time to teach you magic, as we agreed. Are you free now? Of course. I will make as much time as need for you, teacher. He wanted to say, you don't have to try so hard, but Fluda's enthusiasm about magic was the truest expression of his character. In the face of this magic-crazed madman, Ains could not help but feel a little tongue-tied, as a regular person. As he considered this great task, which seemed like settling a claim by a difficult customer, his stomach began to ache. My stomach must hurt the worst of anyone in the imperial capital. Still, he could not delay it any further. Before teleporting to Fluda's room, Ains decided to verify his destination with a divination spell. All right. I shall now cast Greater Teleportation to reach your chambers. Oh, not teleportation, but Greater Teleportation. Dare I ask which tier of magic it belongs to? Let's leave that for later. The message will not last forever. Neither do I have levels in commander-type classes. Still, I would like to ask you something before that. What sort of anti-divination countermeasures have you taken? What spells have you cast? How did you cast them? Did you do anything to ward against teleportation? None at all. I have not taken any such measures. Ains's non-existent brows twitched as Fluda replied. Isn't doing nothing at all a little careless? In other words, everything he said in Fluda's room might well be leaked to a third party. My sincerest apologies. However, I am not adept in that field of magic. In that case, you should use magic items to substitute for that, right? I have seen many magic items in the imperial capital, all purportedly made by you. Ains recalled what he had seen when he first came to the imperial capital. He had been startled by the fact that they had things like refrigerators on sale. It is as you say, but as you must surely know, one must know a related spell in order to make a magic item. For instance, one must know the fireball spell to make a flaming weapon. However, only a few people are willing to learn anti-divination spells. I see, Ains muttered. In YGGDRASIL, one could normally only learn 3 spells per level. A level 20 character would thus be able to learn a maximum of 60 spells. It would be quite difficult to incorporate anti-divination magic into such a limited selection of spells. Perhaps those who were not in the know might think 60 was a sizable sum. But if Ains was limited to 60 spells from the 3rd tier of magic, he would probably have to spend all day worrying over his choices. This was because he had to consider future uses, whether or not he would change his class and so on. There were many things which need to be planned for and anticipated. From that point of view, his rebuke of Fluda was petty and sad. Indeed, I misspoke. It is as you say. Divination magic would necessarily be a lower priority when studying offensive and defensive spells. In the game, he could say, I'll learn this, so I'll leave that to you, and easily settle things. However, the choice of spells was a life-changing decision to the people of this world. It would take a very brave person to learn an unpopular spell. In addition, the divination school of spells was quite deep. One need to anticipate the means that the foe would use to collect information. Simply put, becoming a divination specialist was something which one would stake their lives on. Alright, then I shall give you the anti-divination item I possess. Use that to ward yourself in future. Yes. Even without looking, he could tell that Fluda's head was deeply lowered. For all he knew, he might even be genuflecting. I have certainly received your loving words, teacher. Ains had originally planned to give him a decent item, but the thought of that pained his heart. Then I shall scry your room now. Ains cast his spell on Fluda's chambers. He looked down upon the genuflecting Fluda. Then, he decided to check for magical auras, and as expected of Fluda, there were many different colors in his room. However, none of them looked like a dangerous color which would impede teleportation. After verifying that, he cast Greater Teleportation. His field of view changed, showing that he had successfully teleported to Fluda's room. Though there had been no delays, and he did not sense anyone spying on him, and he was quite certain that he had not jumped into the enemy's base, he still took a quick look around himself. In truth, there was no need to be so worried. However, the brief period of vulnerability after teleportation was when it was easiest to be attacked. These protective actions, to defend against being PKED, had been long drilled into Suzuki Satoru's body. "I bid you welcome, my teacher. Raise your head," Ains commanded Fluda. In all honesty, there was no need for him to go that far. That sort of loyalty, or rather, his thirst for knowledge that led to a desire to obey, was abnormal. It was quite similar to how the people of Nazarick acted. Although Ains had finally started getting used to that sort of thing, seeing it from someone he barely knew made him want to back away. "Yes. Speaking while standing is not good. I'll take a seat." "Yes. Everything I have is yours, teacher. Please, sit anywhere you like." Complex feelings of whether or not to get used to this ran through Ains's heart as he sat on the sofa. However, Fluda did not take the seat opposite him. Instead, he remained as he was, kneeling on the ground with his head raised. "It's fine. Have a seat. Is it really all right? That is, for me to sit in the same way as you, teacher. You should have disciples too, right? Do you treat them this way as well?" This sort of sports team attitude alarmed Ains, which prompted his question. In response, Fluda shook his head. "Not like that, but the difference between myself and you is like that between the heavens and the earth, teacher. I fear to even begin to mention myself in the same breath as." "It's fine. I grant you permission to sit down. Come, have a seat." "Yes." After he made sure Fluda was seated, Ains thought, "My belly really hurts," as he spoke. First, how is the matter that I as? He changed his mind halfway through the word. Asked. "That I ordered you to handle. That is to say, making a written record of the Empire's information on the various countries." "Yes. Most of the information pertaining to the neighboring countries has already been completed. However, what happened? Is there a problem?" "Yes. Or rather, I should say, as expected of the Emperor." A look of pride crossed his face. It was the expression a teacher might have toward an outstanding pupil. "He seems to have noticed my treachery. It was only natural for employees to swear not to reveal their former company's secrets before job hopping." With that in mind, Ains was a villain for making Fluda feed him sensitive information on the Empire. However, Ains knew well that he did not run a company, but a country. Nothing was off-limits for the sake of his nation's prosperity, for the happiness of the people who belonged to the great underground tomb of Nazarick. Ains held no grudge against Jekniv. However, that meant nothing in comparison to the well-being of his own country. If his misfortune made the Sorceress Kingdom prosper, then he would simply have to suffer. That said, Ains still preferred coexistence and mutual prosperity over conflict. Punitomo once said something about Mr. Nash and prisoners' conditions and something along those lines, but the gist of it was, if opportunities were unlimited, cooperation would reap the greatest benefits for all parties involved. TL note: Ains is getting it wrong again, see Nash Equilibrium and the Prisoner's Dilemma. Ains knew that international relations were basically a matter of each party using the other, but he wanted to maintain a good relationship with Jekniv. I kept the number of Imperial casualties to a minimum as the price of poaching Fluda, so we're probably even on that count. I feel a sense of closeness to him now. It must be because of all the times I've spied on him. Is something the matter, teacher? Nothing. Just thinking about certain matters. Really. My deepest apologies for interrupting your thoughts, teacher. There's no need to apologize. I am here today because of you. Oh, thank you very much, teacher. Why is he thanking me so vigorously? Though Ains was puzzled, he eventually managed to get the topic back on track. Ah yes, the fact that you've been turned. Well, it's alright for you to be exposed, but there is a problem. That is to say, your safety. Oh. To think you would actually be worried about the safety of someone like me, teacher. Why did this old man have to overreact to everything? The basic duty of a boss was to look out for the well-being of anyone he did not intend to discard from the beginning. Or did they do things differently in the Empire? If it's the latter, that would be scary. Well, I might kill people who got in my way, but killing someone who was once my subordinate is still. Fluda, that's right, do not get too excited. It would be odd if anyone around you noticed. That will not be a problem. This floor is exclusively for my use. Nobody else is around. He had come here before. That said, this tower was quite large, so it was no wonder the greatest magic caster of the Empire was allowed an entire floor to himself. Back to the matter of your personal safety. Has anyone tried to kill you after your treachery came to light? Nothing of the sort. However, my responsibilities have steadily decreased. And while the Emperor frequently came to consult me in the past, he has not summoned me ever since he returned from the glorious domain that you rule, teacher. I see. Then, Fluda, do you want to come to my side? Oh, gladly. He answered right away. Then, after considering your profession, no, before that, there is something I must do. It concerns your reward. After saying that, Ains exhaled, and then reached into his pocket dimension. He had rehearsed the flow of the conversation which would follow many times, poking fun at the words even as he corrected them. Although he had no way to be sure if Fluda would react as Ains imagined, he had put in enough practice already. As agreed, I shall now impart a portion of my knowledge to you. Take and study this book. Ains handed a tome called the Book of the Dead to him. It was a fairly ancient volume, which gave off a musty smell. Surprisingly enough, the book itself was very sturdy, with no trace of being worm-eaten. Fluda accepted the book Ains offered with trembling hands. Ains was glad that he was undead. If he was still human, the book might be wobbling non-stop from nervousness. Fluda's goal was to plumb the abyss of magic, but Ains did not know what the abyss of magic was. He could teach him about YGGDRASIL, but the abyss of magic or whatnot was another topic entirely. That said, not giving it to him would be a betrayal of his loyalty. One had to repay good unto good and reward loyal service. Thus, Ains had given him a book from his collection, which seemed the most likely to hold the secrets of magical knowledge. The parts he had flipped through seemed to contain something about magic which he could not understand. Then, please excuse me. Fluda reached out to the book, and that delighted expression of his soon twisted into despair after flipping though a few pages. What's the matter? Is this not what you sought? Ains suppressed his unease as he asked that question. It was fine even if it was not what he wanted. He had already practiced for that eventuality. No, it is nothing like that. I simply cannot understand this. Ah, I see. Ains took the book from Fluda, flipped through it, and stopped at a certain page. This chapter concerns the transformation of the dead into souls. Specifically, the section about differentiation. It was written in Japanese, so obviously Fluda could not understand it. However, this looks more like a setting book for a fantasy world than a fantasy novel. The hell is this differentiation stuff? And then there's souls as clouds and so on. It looks really hard and I can't wrap my brain around it at all. Feels like I can only scratch the surface. Could it be that I can't understand this book, even though I can read it? Books were like the occult, or rather, this book was pretty much an occult volume. To Suzuki Satoru, who had no knowledge in this field, all he saw was a collection of scribblings. Still, all this seemed to have been taken from some kind of mythology. If Tabula Smaragdina was around, he would probably be able to explain it to him. Oh, the sense of guilt in Ains's heart grew as he watched Fluda look at him with joyful eyes. Indeed. Well, I cannot give this to you because I only have one set, but give this a try. Ains placed a pair of glasses on the book and handed it to him. Fluda put it on and hurriedly flipped through the pages. It's saying that souls are in ties like the foam left by the waves of this great world, and so whether great or small, they are fundamentally the same. That means, he's gone mad. Even Ains was startled, to the point where he nearly shrank back. The way Fluda's eyes were wide open and bloodshot, his breathing like a wild beast, made it seem as though he was about to pounce on someone. How is it? Fluda's eyes pivoted and stared straight at Ains. This is amazing, teacher. This is the law that I so out. The alarm he felt at the old man's mania exceed a predetermined threshold, and Ains swiftly calmed down again. Is that so? Then, return me the glasses. Wah. But this. Consider the translation of that book to be your trying. Once you can understand and digest it, you will be able to set foot in a higher domain. It would be pointless for you to use these glasses. How could this be? Then, may I be allowed to give this book a once-over first? One page should still be all right. But if you continue after that, it will negatively affect your growth. Fluda closed the book shut with a pattern, and then closed his eyes. After several seconds, he opened his eyes and spoke. His voice had returned to normal. Understood. I will abide by your teachings, O teacher. May I seek your aid if there are matters I do not understand? As long as it is within my power to answer. Yes. Fluda removed the glasses and returned them to Ains. Excellent. I won't hear anything from Fluda for a while now. I need to instruct him about this first. How shall I say this? Ains struggled to pry open the vaults of his memory. Then, in solemn, heavy tones, which made one think of the voice a leader would have, Ains spoke. Fluda. Yes. I have entrusted you with this book of arcana because I trust you. You must never hand it to a third party. The same applies to any notes you make to study it. Nothing about this book can be allowed to spread. Yes. There is hardly a need to tell you the reason for that, but this is knowledge that surpasses what humans can comprehend. It would be very troublesome if others came to learn of it. Although someone of your talent might not be beyond salvation, I do not want to have to clean up behind you 10 years down the road. But of course, I will not leak any of the knowledge I have obtained from you to others. I swear it. I trust you, Fluda. Do not disappoint me. Yes. Fluda got up from his chair and knelt on the ground. He wanted to say that there was no need to go to that extent, but this too was proof of how effective his air of majesty had been. Ains could not help but feel proud that his hours of acting and vocalization practice had been put to good use. Enough. Since you understand, I shall say no more. Return to your seat. Still, it will be very difficult for you to decipher an unknown language without any help. Do you have some way of overcoming that? Yes. I can use a translation spell, though its efficacy is very limited. I believe that with that, I can slowly decipher the text. Really now? Really now? Marvelous. This answer was exactly what Ains wanted to hear. By slowly giving him the appropriate practice, he would be able to buy himself time. In addition, a problem like that would not be enough to make Floodor give up. Then I shall hand this to you. No, that's it. I will lend you a box for you to store it in. I do not think that you will treat it lightly, but someone might wish to steal it from you. Ains pulled a box out of his pocket space. It was an item of the same grade which he used to store his personal notebook. Once you store the book in here, even if this box is stolen, it will take quite some time to open it. Of course, it will all be for nothing if someone overhears the command word to open the box. So be careful. Of course, teacher. I will never do anything like that. Good. Ains shifted his gaze from Floodor, who was caressing the book in delight, to the ceiling. Now, what would he talk about next? Ah, that's right. The matter of your treachery coming to light, and thus you coming over to me. When can you leave? If teacher wishes it, I can leave at any time. I have no attachments to this country. Ains mentally furrowed his brows. He had no idea what to say to someone who could casually discard his position of trust. He might well do the same thing to Ains in the future. Ains marked Floodor down several points with a red pen in his heart's ledger. Then, Floodor, I wish to have you participate in the magical research of the Sorceress Kingdom. However, your spells will not be put into circulation. They will only be shared with me and those whom I trust. Can you bear it? Can you forsake your desire for fame? There will be no problem at all. The only thing I desire is to glimpse the secrets of magic. I desire nothing else. Ains studied Floodor in earnest, the man who could make such a statement. Ains had no ability to evaluate a person's character. As human beings, it was obvious that Floodor, a genius sage who had lived far beyond the span of a normal human being and who was deeply involved in the operations of the vast nation called the Empire, was superior to him. There was no way for him to see through any attempt by Floodor to deceive him. However, being unable to see through such things and not trying to see through such things were two different matters. With that attitude in mind, Ains stared at Floodor, and in the end he simply said, "Good. I will entrust you with all the powers and privileges of your office once you arrive in the Sorceress Kingdom. I also intend to help you with magical research as much as possible." Then, now, there would be one more person helping Nazarick beyond the barriers. If he could obtain the woman which Demiurge and Albedo had recommended, Nazarick would be further strengthened. He had to increase his power as much as possible, so long as he could not see the true face of his enemy. The enemy possessed a world-class item, so he had to obtain a power aside from YGGDRASILs as soon as possible. He had to assume that anything he could do, the enemy could as well. However, there was one more problem. That would be, how would he protect the Empire? Demiurge felt that the Empire was a potential enemy, but Ains did not think so. Although the future was unclear, the use of force alone in world conquest was not a wise decision. If the Sorceress Kingdom was painted as a nation which annihilated everyone who stood against it, countries which could have been friends would probably end up as enemies. That being the case, why not form a deep friendship with his fellow dictator Jepniv, and send that message to their subordinates? This way, I'll be able to minimize the force Demiurge and the others use in world conquest. What a brilliant plan! More than the alliance of nations, or the alliance of guilds. Friendship. The shapes of his heteromorphic friends appeared in Ains's mind. Still, how should I make friends with him? Giving people things isn't the right way to make friends, right? thus protecting the empire, the most precious thing to Dukniv, should be the best way. It's quite likely that my enemies will set their sights upon it. He put himself in the role of the people who brainwashed Shaltir. If they used the methods Ains used then, in the worst-case scenario, they might use Ayashub-Nigarath on the imperial capital. Everyone would think I did it, regardless of the actual culprit. Then, they would spread that news throughout the world. That would greatly decrease the Sorceress Kingdom's influence. Ains recalled his YGGDRASIL days. It was foolish to directly fight a powerful guild, so it was quite common to instigate wars with other guilds to weaken the powerful guild's influence. These methods would probably be applicable here. Ains would probably do so if placed in that situation, and so it was very likely his foe would do the same thing. In order to prevent this sort of thing from happening, Ains considered allowing Fluda to spread rumors that he could not use that spell again, a lie, naturally. However, Fluda could no longer be used, so he had to consider some other method. This is close to forbidding the carrying of palm-sized dangerous objects. As expected, I'll need to discuss the matter with Demiurge, maybe order him to think of a way to deal with this. However, would he not think it strange? Ah, how troublesome. I can't figure it out. If only he could hand everything to those two. However, if he did that, it would damage his image as an absolute ruler. He had to think of a way to solve his problems while maintain his position. Teacher, what is wrong? Fluda, intend to protect the empire for some time. Do you have any ideas? May I know why you ask? Conquering it would be easy, but I have no interest in standing atop a pile of rubble. I wish to keep the empire intact, and so I would like to prevent the loss of fighting power that would result when they lose you. Fluda's wrinkles deepened. It is difficult to answer that question immediately. I believe that there will be no problems for a while even if I am not around. That said, it is also true that nobody can fill the void that I will leave. If it is fine, then I shall stay for the time being. Are you willing to do so? Then, I will contact you again tomorrow, after the discussions are complete. Yes. Right, there are two more things I want to ask you. First, I would like to know the details of the Martial Lord. The second matter concerns Death Knights. As the appointed time drew near, Ains cast a detection spell. Normally, he would have stacked numerous defensive spells on himself first, but it would be too wasteful to expend a lot of valuable scrolls. Unlike how things were at the graveyard, when he was sure there were hostiles present, Ains simply cast the spell. That said, he picked a place where any counterattacks would not strike others. A different scene appeared in his field of vision. This was the interior of a coach. Ains manipulated the floating point of view and observed the exterior of the coach. Then, Ains cast Greater Teleportation. The teleport took place without incident, and Ains opened the door to the coach. Ainsik, who was seated within, had a look of shock on his face. However, Ains nonchalantly boarded, closed the door, and dispelled the invisibility spell he had cast on himself. As I thought, it was Your Majesty. Although I understand the need for secrecy, could you please not use an invisibility spell next time? If I do not use invisibility, I will be spotted. No. It should be fine because of Your Majesty's mask, am I wrong? Indeed, that might be the case, but I used a teleportation spell. I would like to avoid being drawn into troublesome matters. Indeed. Well, since you understand, shall we leave? All right. Let us depart. The coach passed through the opened gate, and reached the place designated by the doorman. This was a parking area which could accommodate several coaches. Then, let us proceed. Ains dismounted from the coach after Ainsik. An old man in a butler's uniform awaited him there. He was accompanied by a maid. Though he looked like a butler, he did not feel as powerful as Sebas. He seemed like a very ordinary, albeit well-bred old man. The butler was human, though the same was not true for the maid. A pair of ears adorned the top of the maid's head. Not human ears, but ears from some kind of animal. Although it was hard to be sure since they were obscured by her hair, there was no swelling at the site where normal humans had their ears. She had a cute face, but it was not the same way a human being was cute, more like an animal sort of cute. "Welcome, Ainzik Samaram, Your Majesty the Saucer King, I believe. The master awaits you. Please allow us to lead the way. May I ask you to follow behind us?" Wah! After he heard the butler's speech, a strangled cry of surprise escaped Ainzik's mouth. Ainzik had said in yesterday's talk that he would not bring up Ainz's true identity, so he must have been shocked because they had managed to guess who Ainz was. For Ainz, however, this was nothing to be alarmed about. His mask might have concealed his face, but he had not changed his clothes. Anyone with a good information network would have heard about him. Under these circumstances, not replying would be rude. "Thank you. Then, please show us the way." "Yes." The butler lowered his head. A beat later, so did the maid. After the two of them started walking, Ainzik quietly told Ainz, "Thank you very much, Your Majesty." His thanks was because Ainz had responded to the butler. "No need for that," Ainz wanted to say, but in the end he accepted the thanks in silence. To Suzuki Satoru, a superior ought to cover for his subordinates if the latter made a mistake. Ainzik's thanks was a natural reaction. It was an unavoidable step in his future growth as one of Ainz's subordinates. Once more, Ainz keenly realized that being a boss was not relaxing at all. Suddenly, Ainz realized that he had never once said, "thanks," while he was playing the role of a ruler. "I need to find a time to thank the Guardians and all the NPCs. I need to show my appreciation for their hard work." Ainz's objective was to run the Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick like a benevolent company. As he idly pondered the matter, he did not stop moving, but continued walking toward the direction where he was being led. Although, it was quite surprising to actually encounter a rabbit man, Your Majesty. Wouldn't it be better to discuss this sort of thing after the person in question was gone? Ainz thought that, but the topic interested him, so he decided to go with the flow. Shouldn't it be Rabbit Woman? No. Well, their species name is Rabbit Man. Ainzik, it was merely a joke. Taking it so seriously is somewhat troubling. I wonder if she came from further east than the City-State Alliance. How exotic. Ainz had no idea how far away east of the City-State Alliance was. His information did not yet cover such distant regions. Still, he had not seen any in the kingdom, and she was the only rabbit man he had encountered in the imperial capital. It must be hard to live in a place without other members of one's kind, even without considering discrimination from other races. Ainz was curious and wanted to ask her some questions, but he could not do so. It would be troublesome if he stepped on a landmine during their conversation. Before long, they reached a house. "The master awaits you within. Please." The interior of the house was decorated with many articles of lovingly oiled and maintained weapons and armor. They were clean, free of dust and displayed in neat rows. Upon closer inspection, many of the weapons were scuffed and dented on their business ends. It was clear that these weapons had been used in actual combat. Rather than a weapon merchant's shop display, it seemed more like the gallery owner displaying the weapons of his glorious past. After a hasty glance around, Ainz's gaze returned to the sword he saw first. It was the most beautiful of all the weapons in the room. There was no sign of damage on the sword. The gallery's owner must have been quite fond of it, judging by how it had been placed to be the first thing anyone would see when they entered the room. Does it please you? Ah, truly an excellent collection. Thus did Ains answer the room's owner seated on the sofa, in other words, the owner of this gallery. The owner was stout-bodied and his hair was cut so short that one could see his scalp. They did not bother with greetings but continued talking about weapons. So, which piece do you favor most? That one. Everyone who comes into this room says that. Ains entered the room and stood before the sword. May I pick it up? Of course, by all means. Ains thanked him and picked up the sword. Of course, it would drop if he actually tried to wield it in earnest, but holding it was fine. He peered at the sword, and then he noticed the characters carved on the blade. These bizarre characters were vaguely familiar to Ains. He searched his memories, and finally found the answer. Runes. Oh, as expected of your majesty. You know of these letters. What? Seriously? Are runes commonly used in this world? Runes were an alphabet which had apparently been used in the past of Suzuki Satoru's world. The fact that such characters existed in this world meant that it was very likely someone from the same world as Suzuki Satoru had spread him here. Thus, Ains carefully answered. Probably, I believe. I only know of them. I cannot create rune-engraved items. May I know which smith made this? Oh, that was a good question. That sword was forged by a runesmith of the Dwarven Kingdom in the Azalesian mountain range. It is about 150 years old. The blade can accumulate electricity, and there's a maker's mark on the hilt. Did you see it? The gallery owner was standing next to Ains. The overwhelming smell of cologne assaulted his nose. This is a piece by Stonell, a famous artisan. A dwarven artisan. Looks like I'll have to learn more about that. Ho, that does sound like a famous artisan. Are there any more examples of his work here? Ains looked around, and the man laughed heartily. Ha! No, not in here. I store them elsewhere. However, this is the only piece which bears such a powerful enchantment. Ho! Ains concealed his disappointment as he quietly emoted. That said, he had still learned something about the artisan called Stonell. He had to see if there was a player there. I've heard that the weapons made by dwarven runesmiths rarely circulate on the market. And you actually have more of them in store. Ains gave Ainsik a mental thumbs up for asking that question. Indeed I do, Ainsik, the man smiled. I snatch them up whenever they're on auction. Recently, there was a really persistent adventurer trying to outbid me. I ended up paying 3 times what I had originally planned. Ainsik shook his head incredulously, sort of, while Ains nodded in approval. This was how things were for a collector. An outsider would never be able to understand. At times, even Ains did not understand the actions of his past self. Ains wanted to keep asking, but in the end he decided to return the sword to its original place. It seems I was entranced by your marvelous collection without even greeting you. Do forgive my lack of respect. The man was all smiles. Your Majesty has a way with words. Then, allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Osk, an insignificant merchant. You will surely anger the other merchants of the Empire if you call yourself insignificant. I remain the Saucer King, Ains Ulgaun. Not a day goes by when I do not hear of your mighty name. Please, have a seat. I will have the servants prepare drinks. While this is a rare opportunity, there is no need to prepare my share. Osk's size did not seem quite proportional to his head. He studied Ains with those eyes. Your Majesty, I have heard the rumors. But could I trouble you to remove that mask? Since this is a request of the home's owner, I must comply. Ains took off his mask, revealing his bare face. There was no look of surprise on Osk's face. His eyes were very small, so once he narrowed his eyes to smile, there was no way to look into their depths. "Oh, I see, I see." Osk nodded several times before speaking again. "In truth, I was worried that I would not be able to prepare tea that would be able to satisfy the tastes of the renowned Saucer King, but it would seem that was wasted effort on my part." After those cheerful words, Osk's belly wobbled with laughter. "Say, Osk, why did you think His Majesty would come with me?" "Ah, it's not hard to tell, right? Erantel is under the control of His Majesty. When I heard that the Guildmaster of Erantel's Adventurers Guild was visiting, in the company of someone more important than himself, only one person came to mind. Granted, it could have been some other confidant of the Saucer King, but my instincts told me otherwise," Osk said. "Then, is it my turn to ask questions now? Did you once use the weapons displayed here?" Osk chuckled at Ains's question. "How could that be? Your Majesty, to consider my body. I can wield an abacus, but I have never once swung the sword. That is just a hobby of mine. Since I was a child, I have always admired the strong, as well as swords and other weapons." "I see. It seems you understand. Now then, I have a question of my own. I have heard of your Majesty's unstoppable might. Was that due to the long time you have lived? Well, I suppose it does count as living." "That is correct, in comparison to the lifespans of you humans." As Ains said this, he thought of something. What kind of being was the Saucer King Ains Ulgaun? Obviously he could not say, "Certainly not, you two are older than me." Even if he did say so, they would not believe him. So he had to speak while in character as the Saucer King. However, if he did not lock down the exact details of the Saucer King's character, things might turn out badly. In any case, it's confirmed that the undead live a long time. If anyone asks why I do not know certain things despite my long life, I can reply that I was focused on researching magic. Let's use that as a basic detail for the Saucer King's character. That being the case, do you possess weapons of the past? Judging by that question, Osk did not intend to hide his curiosity. Of course I do. However, I cannot just give them to you, no. For a suitable amount, no, I will try to pay 3 times the market value. Ains could not reject him on the spot. This was because he recalled the precarious state of his personal finances. However, it would hardly be dignified for the ruler of a country to go, "Sure, let's do it. Money does not exactly appeal to me. I sincerely apologize. Saying so to your Majesty, who is the ruler of a country, was terribly rude of me. Then, what can I offer to make you want to trade them to me?" So he wants to phrase it as receiving a bounty for meritorious service to my country, or something like that. Well, in that case. Ains took out a short sword. It was wreathed in a billowing mist effect. Its faintly translucent blue blade was made of blue crystal metal, and it contained little mana. That said, its overall ability classified it as a high-class item in YGGDRASIL, and it was certainly more powerful than the average magic item in this world. This is... 2 voices cried out those words. Ainzik's eyes went wide as he stared at the short sword. "Umu," Ains muttered, before placing it in front of Ainzik. "Take it." Ha. Once more, those words were spoken by 2 voices. "Ainzik, this is a gift for your hard work. That said, this is not an award, nor is this meant to symbolize your station. I simply felt that this sort of thing is similar to the reward I wish to hand out in my ideal nation, so I give this to you. If you require cash instead, it is fine to sell it off." This short sword did not contain enough data to harm Ains. Nor was it one of the weapons made by his former guildmates and thus filled with memories. How could I dare accept such? Ainzik's body shuddered uncontrollably. This is nothing amazing. Well, if you do not want it, I can change it for something else when the time comes. A healing potion, perhaps. That should be fine. What do you think? Ainsec hesitated for a while, but in the end he decided to keep the short sword. I shall accept it. Thank you very much, Your Majesty. I will continue serving Your Majesty with all my strength, with effort that will not be outshone by this sword. Congratulations, Ainsec. If you run into any trouble, remember to think of this friend of yours. Osk eyed the short sword as he said this. Ainsec had a look on his face like a mother bear protecting her cubs. It won't happen. Never. Ains decided to change his tone. Well then, let us move on to the real business. Osk reluctantly pulled his eyes away from the handkerchief that Ainsec had used to wrap the sword, and replied, Understood. May I ask why you have graced my humble estate with your presence? Umu. I am not given to dressing up my words. Let me get to the point. I would like you to arrange a bout with the martial lord of the arena. Osk's eyes widened, but soon they returned to their normal shape. I have heard that the martial lord is not part of the arena personnel, but a gladiator you have raised since he was a child. Ainsec told me that you can quickly put a fight on the cards if you agree to have the martial lord fight, which is why I came to make this request of you. Fuha. Are you serious, Your Majesty? You do know that the martial lord is the mightiest man in the arena, with a monster's body and outstanding fighting skills. He might be the strongest one in history. Perhaps Your Majesty counts strong individuals among his followers as well, but defeating him is... Osk shook his head with pride. Is he stronger than Fluda? No, this is from the perspective of a warrior. It's not applicable to a magic caster. All they have to do is fly up and attack repeatedly with magic, and that's the end of it. Osk's quiet, grumbling somewhat perturbed Ains, and then Ainsec chimed in. Once, an adventurer team took to the sky and won by raring spells and arrows on him from a distance. That was a pretty disappointing fight. Ever since, the arena has forbidden teleportation and flight magic. Then, Osk looked at Ains. He seemed to have recovered. Cough. Well, that was rude of me, Your Majesty. I recalled some bitter memories. Then, back to the topic, Your Majesty. May I ask who intends to fight the martial lord? Are they human? Ains and Ainsec looked at each other. Then, Ains answered, that would be me. I, Ains Ulgaun, shall be his opponent. After a brief period of silence, Osk asked in a panic. But are you not the ruler of a country, Your Majesty? Indeed I am. What of it? No, that's correct, but... I understand what worries you. You must be thinking, what would happen if I came to be hurt? It would be fine if it ended in just getting hurt. Osk muttered under his breath. Ains pretended not to notice. Be at ease. There will not be a problem, no matter what happens to me. I will leave written proof of that. But if that sort of thing does happen, I won't be able to do business anymore. I have heard that the Empire is supposed to be an ally of the Sorceress Kingdom. If I allow the king of an allied country to be seriously injured, the state will have its eye on me. I promise you, you will not be inconvenienced by this. Even if you say so. Osk paused to think, and then asked again. These words might be unpleasant to the ear, but could you offer up something as a guarantee? A guarantee? Like what? Please give me something like what you gave Ainsec earlier. If anything happens, it'll be fine as long as I can keep that item. If that is what it takes to satisfy you, then I shall make that promise. However, I cannot give it to you right away. I promise it will reach you by tomorrow. Thank you very much, Your Majesty. There is also another matter I would like to ask, though I fear it is inappropriate. Ains waved, indicating that Osk should continue. As a promoter, I collect a lot of information. Much of that information pertains to powerful beings which might appear in the arena, or monsters. There are also rumors concerning Your Majesty. Dare I ask if it is true that Your Majesty slew tens of thousands of the kingdom's people with a single spell? Cough. Ainzik coughed in a very contrived way. He was glaring at Usk with reproachful eyes, but this was nothing that had to be hidden, nor was it something to be ashamed of. Indeed, that is true. I slew them with my magic. Will you reproach me for it? No, I was simply asking to gauge the extent of Your Majesty's mystical powers. After all, if you did use that spell from the rumors, it would be very bad. After all, the arena is within the imperial capital. No, I will not cast a spell like that. Even Ains had no intention of using such a spell in the middle of an allied country. What kind of terrorist would do that sort of thing? Of course, I feel the same way as well. Unlike the common image of the undead, Your Majesty is a noble and rational man. I do not believe you will enact a great slaughter because you hate the living. That said, making assumptions and neglecting to confirm these things might lead to failure. Ains agreed on that point as well. This was one of the dangers that came with allowing a new person to join. In truth, Suzuki Satoru had failed like this in the past. Your concerns are valid. Allow me to repeat myself, I will not use that spell. Why is that? Is it because it has something to do with the alignment of the stars? While that is not related to the mat. A light bulb went off over Ains's head. Well, that spell is one of my most powerful trump cards. Because Elnix Dono desired it, I went out of my way to cast that grand spell, which I can only use once every 10 years. Thus, for the next decade, I must conserve my strength. Ho! Quote. A strange gleam lit up Usk's eyes. Is it really alright to tell me that? After all, this might be considered to be a weakness of Your Majesty. It is fine. I may not be able to use a destructive spell like that, but slaughtering any fools who oppose me is still easy. After all, it does not mean I cannot use other spells. As expected of Your Majesty. In other words, the Martial Lord will also be an easy opponent. Is that what you are implying? After Ains nodded with confidence, a smile lit up Usk's face. However, when Ains studied him, he could not be sure if the smile was genuine. I see. Finally, please allow me one more question. Why do you want to fight the Martial Lord, Your Majesty? Because I have heard that he is a powerful foe. I wish to know who is stronger, between him and Gazef Stronov. There was Gazef in the kingdom, so perhaps the greatest reason is because I want to know who is his equivalent in the empire. Of course, that was not why Ains was fighting. However, it was the reason he and Ainsec had agreed upon after discussing the matter. It would have been fine to state the real reason, but Usk was not a trustworthy person. In truth, he seemed like the sort who prioritized his own gains. Ains felt that being honest with him would not end well. I understand. Thank you very much. Then, I shall schedule the fight with the Martial Lord. However, Usk raised his hand to interrupt Ains's thanks. I hope he will abide by the rules of the arena. In addition, while Your Majesty might be taking the match with the Martial Lord seriously, it is still a performance of sorts for us. Thus, an overly one-sided fight would be terribly boring. With that in mind, I would like to request that Your Majesty not use magic, and that you will use a sword, a weapon, to battle the Martial Lord. I submit that these conditions should make for a good fight. What are you saying? Ainzik sprang up from his seat. His face was red from anger. Is that even possible? His Majesty is a magic caster. How do you expect him to win? Ho! Indeed, that is the case. There would be no way for His Majesty the Saucer King to win once his magic was sealed. My, to think I actually brought up such a sensible matter. Still, I did not expect to hear these words from your mouth. I would have expected you to be all right with His Majesty losing. It seems my opinion of you has changed. You, Ainzik, don't get too worked up. It is fine, Your Majesty. What did you say? Ains chuckled, because Oscar and Ainzik were looking at him in an amusing way. However, it would be bad if that laugh was interpreted as sneering, so Ains tried to mask it with a snort. However, that was impossible for someone who had only a hole for a nose. Ains decided not to waste his energy and decided to try and bluff his way through with words. You seem to have misheard me. I said, it is fine. There was no change in Oscar's expression, but his mind was working at high speeds. That much was obvious. Then, will you swear it on the name of the Saucer King, Your Majesty? Swear on my name. I understand. I, Ains Ulgaun, swear by my own name that I shall not use any form of magic during the battle with the Martial Lord. Wait, Your Majesty. How can you make such an oath without even seeing the Martial Lord's strength? Ainzik's words were very sensible. However, if his information on the Martial Lord was correct, there should be no problems in doing so. Well, it'll work out somehow. Do you really think it'll work itself out? Ains was vaguely moved by Ainzik's retort. Nobody had stated their opinions like this ever since he had begun his reign as the ruler of Nazarick. That had come up a little during his time as Morn, but even that had faded away after he had risen through the ranks. You too. If the king of another country dies in the Empire's arena, there'll all be hell to pay. Of course, Ains thought as he locked eyes with Osk. Well, that's only to be expected. What will you do, Your Majesty? It is not too late to accept the advice of your loyal subject and give up now. Ains shrugged in response. He could understand Ainzik's worries. After all, this plan had originally been his idea. Granted, he had been operating under the assumption that he could use magic when he came up with that plan. However, did he really think that Ains without magic was that weak? It will be fine. More importantly, shouting like that is quite shameful, Ainzik. Then, Osk. I'm not too clear on this, but what good does my death do you? Osk's eyes went wide in surprise. A reaction like that was not the slightest bit cute on a middle-aged man like him. It seems Your Majesty is mistaken. I would gain nothing from it. As the Guildmaster says, it would be a far greater hindrance for me. There did not seem to be any ulterior motives behind proposing these disadvantageous conditions for Ains. In all likelihood, it had been born from his thoughts as a promoter. Is that so? Then, we will proceed as planned. Your Majesty, do you have a way to defeat the Martial Lord, who is stronger than Gazef Stronov, without magic? Stronov, huh? Truly a man of enviable strength. Ains noticed the look of surprise on Ainzik's face, but Ains did not say a word as he recalled the former warrior captain. If the Martial Lord is stronger than that man, then obviously, I'll have to be on my guard. However, the strength I speak of refers to his spirit and not his fighting ability. Now, if we were comparing the strength of the Martial Lords and Stronov's sword arms, surely the former would slay the latter in a moment. I see. Speaking of which, I must continue answering the question which you asked earlier, Your Majesty. Osk raised both his hands. His arms were muscular and bereft of flab. I love the clash of sword against sword and fist against fist. Regretfully, I have no talent for fighting skills, and all my efforts could win me victory. That was why I thought of making a warrior who could substitute for me, and have him attain victory in my place. Osk sneered. This was not the merchant's attitude he had been showing until now, but his face as a human being. This was the first time Ains had encountered such a strange person, although he knew that fetishes varied from person to person. In other words, Osk had a particularly abnormal fetish. Ains made a mental compartment called perverts, and filed Osk into it. Therefore, it would feel very good should your majesty lose to the martial lord I have trained. Is that so? Osk and Ainsec looked at Ains, surprise written all over their faces. Ains wanted to ask, what have you been doing since just now? Don't give me that dumb look. If you have something to say, say it. No, that's all I have to say. I have no idea what sort of reaction you want from me, Osk. Humans are truly complicated creatures. Well, if that's all, does that mean you expect me to fill the gap? How about this? Are you really that happy to beat me while I cannot use my magic? For some reason, Osk stumbled over his answer. That. It's just that I don't really like magic that much. I see. Then, let's leave the matter at that. Osk and Ainsec looked at each other. Come on, spit it out, Ains thought. Still, this was how the working world went. If someone who has no permission to speak bared his heart, he would get into trouble. We have made our true intentions known to each other, so let us not waste time with petty deceptions and get on with things. How will you arrange the schedule for the fight with the martial lord? If possible, I'd like to make a big event of it. Then, I'll officially announce a challenger to the martial lord after today's events. I'd better get on it. However, intend to keep the fact that the challenger is your majesty a secret until the match starts. I do not understand your reasons for that. Would that not be a waste, from a promoter's point of view? Logic dictates that the king of an allied country showing up at an arena matches. Oya, come to think of it, I haven't heard of a welcoming ceremony. Is it scheduled for later? Ains could not help but look away. This was bad. Ains gave thanks that he did not have a heart, and then forcefully shook his empty, undead skull. Then, he shrugged helplessly. I came to the Empire in a personal capacity. El Nixdono does not know that I am here. Osk's expression vanished. He must have scented something suspicious. As a merchant, it made sense that he would be very sensitive to potential profit. In other words, if there were no gains to be made, there would be no point in participating. I understand. Publicly announcing your majesty's challenge would surely draw comments from all sides. Naturally, the identity of the challenger must be kept secret. Then, can I assume you will handle all the issues which will result from this, your majesty? Of course. Leave that part of things to me. I understand. Then, can I take up a bit more of your time? I would like to finalize the schedule for the day of the match. Has he gone back? Yes, master. The butler had returned from sending off the Saucer King, and that was his answer to Osk's question. Really now, Osk replied, and then he looked to the maid standing behind the butler. Headhunter Rabbit. What? The man before him thought as he tilted his dainty little head. Yes. His. Quote. He was a man, dressed in an outfit that best fit a maid. According to him, he did so because dressing like a woman made others underestimate him and become careless, and also because people would not attack his groin. It would seem that it was for those two reasons, and not because of personal preference. However, given that he displayed adorable motions like those from just now even in everyday life, he probably enjoyed this sort of thing to some extent. The fact that his thoughts had actually wandered that far was a sign that he was thinking too much about this. It did not inconvenience Osk in any particular way, so he did not mind. Then, there was the matter of his alias. Headhunter Rabbit. It did not suit a cute-looking man, but then again, he was a mercenary who hailed from a nation to the east of the City-State Alliance, famous as a warrior-cum-assassin. Osk had signed a contract with him and hired him for a staggering amount. He had contracted worker teams and gladiators as bodyguards too, but nobody else was paid as highly as him. His strength matched his price tag, above an Orichalcum-ranked adventurer, at the very least. The fact was that he had not been embroiled in any troublesome matters ever since he had employed him. "Tell me what you think of His Majesty, the Saucer King." He had another ability, besides being a first-rate fighter-cum-assassin. That was the ability to analyze his opponents. Through long experience in the murderous profession of being a warrior and assassin, he had attained the ability to evaluate people, to see if they were strong. It's extremely bad. To date, there was only one other person about whom he had stated a similar opinion. That person was the Martial Lord himself. In other words, this was the second person he could not defeat. Incidentally, the rank below that was, "It's bad," which he had said when he had seen the Empire's 4 knights. Is His Majesty a strong warrior as well? I'm not sure. Judging by his footsteps alone, he's not that strong. He doesn't walk like someone who's been trained as a warrior or assassin. Rather, the uncle beside him feels more like a warrior. Still, it's bad. Just standing behind him made me want to run away. After he said that, he extended his arms. Osk's eyes were entranced by his fists. They were round fists. His fists had been reshaped by punching hard objects tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of times, until they were now in a round, ball-like shape. These hands were made for battle. A chill ran through Osk, followed by an uncontrollable excitement. "Where are you looking, you pervert? I was just thinking that those were good hands." It was true he liked those hands very much, but sadly, headhunting rabbit did not interest him. Gender was not a big matter for him. However, Osk's ideal partner was the warrior from the kingdom's Blue Rose, Garen. Granted, headhunting rabbit would make a good partner as well, but he felt too skinny, compared to her. In contrast, the Martial Lord was a little too thick. "So you don't want me to renew my contract with you next year? That would be very troubling. Hardly anyone can match up to you." Well, the heiress of Igenia aside. Oops, it seems we've got in off topic. Then, Osk's eyes left those round fists, and traveled up. Goosebumps broke out on headhunting rabbit's skin. I haven't been able to calm down yet. It feels really bad. So he's nothing much as a warrior, but he's an extremely bad opponent. He's just like another martial lord. Osk picked up on what headhunting rabbit was trying to say. He was referring to that martial lord. There were powerful and weak races in this world. Humans typified the weak races, being little more than meat bags without dark vision, with no hard carapaces to protect their bodies, or other special abilities. In contrast, there were the mighty races, like dragons, for instance. They were protected by hard scales. They were graceful and mighty. They were equipped with claws and teeth which could easily rend steel. They possessed fiery or icy breath and other special abilities, and they were furnished with wings that they could use to soar through the sky. They were a race that was strong, even without warrior training. What headhunting rabbit was trying to say was that the Saucer King belonged to such a race. The undead had poor physical stats. This was what Osk knew to be true. Yet, it did not seem to be the case for the Saucer King. Osk-sama, why did you accept this match? His Majesty knows about the Martial Lord, but we do not know about his abilities. I feel it will be a very unfavorable match. Ara. You don't get it. Headhunting rabbit replied in a tired voice. I don't think about these pointless things. The butler looked to Osk in a surprised way. Thus, Osk answered, does the champion flee from challengers? Is that all? That is all. However, that is also why it is so important. There's no need to just kill each other. But if this is an official challenge, complete with a letter sent up to request a match, it can't be avoided. The martial lord would think the same way as well. What an idiot. Perhaps. Still, that's meant for you. However, I feel His Majesty is the type who reveals his true strength in battle, rather than during a competitive match. Now, consider a regulated bout, and a no-holds-barred death match. Under which circumstances would you prefer to face the Saucer King? Neither. I'd turn tail and run. Osk laughed, because that was the wisest choice. Then, next up, what do you think of the Saucer King? That line was not directed at his master, but at the butler waiting in the rear who did not change his expression. In the past, he might have expressed his displeasure silently, to indicate that was not the proper attitude a hired man should have toward his master. Still, that displeasure had vanished somewhere along the way. Perhaps it was when Head-Hunting Rabbit had slain a would-be assassin. He has a very charming personality. Head-Hunting Rabbit mused in a strange way. Ainzik did not appear to be under duress. In other words, the Saucer King had something which allowed him to secure the cooperation of a city's residents within a few months of conquering it. Did you see his regal bearing? Whether it was in bringing only Ainzik, or agreeing to not use magic in his battle, he radiated the pride of the mighty. In addition, he's a very intelligent man. It feels like he's very used to this sort of negotiations. Even he felt it was surprising. Osk was a merchant, but the Saucer King viewed him as an equal. Under normal circumstances, some nobles would want to establish who was on top, to say nothing of a king. This was what baffled him. He could understand it if he had been a trader in the past, but that was impossible. In other words, he was simply adept at negotiations. In terms of overall ability, he is comparable to our emperors. Of course, he had not read that deeply into him. It was simply that the Saucer King frightened him that much. No, I should say that he's equivalent to the Bloody Emperor, at the very least. So at a minimum, he was equal to the greatest emperor in history. What a nightmare. Osk shook his head. He would be paralyzed by contemplation if this went on. Of course, he did not want to gaze into the abyss of the Saucer King. However, there was one thing he had to do right now. I must inform the martial lord of this, and keep him in prime condition from now on. Will he agree? He is a warrior. He will not run from a challenge. Well, it'd be good if he could win.